A billionaire finds two twin girls praying at his son's grave, but when he discovers why they're there, he begins to cry. The sharp October wind whipped through the headstones at Green Haven Memorial Cemetery, sweeping golden leaves off the century-old oak trees that arched over the graves like silent guardians. William Anderson adjusted his cashmere scarf against the chill, his footsteps echoing on the stone pathways while he held a bouquet of white lilies, Michael's favorite flowers. 65 years of life and all his fortune had not prepared William for the loneliness that consumed him since that terrible April morning 5 years ago. The business empire he had built, the skyscrapers bearing the Anderson name, the headlines celebrating his achievements, all of it felt empty now. Each visit to his son's grave was a stabbing reminder of regret. Every step toward that Italian marble headstone, a painful recollection of unsaid words. But on that morning, something was different. The sound came first, soft, almost imperceptible, a child's murmur carried by the autumn wind. William frowned, slowing his pace. In 15 years of visiting this same spot, he had never encountered anyone else in this private area of the cemetery, especially so early. Rounding the final bend in the path, he froze. Two tiny figures knelt before Michael's grave. Identical girls, no older than 5, wearing red coats that seemed far too small for the cold morning. Their dark hair, tied in uneven braids, bobbed as they moved, busy with something William could not discern. "And the teacher said I played really well today, Daddy," one of them whispered, her sweet voice filled with childish pride. "Sophie's still learning, but she promises to practice more, right, Sophie?" The other girl, Sophie, nodded emphatically, scattering colorful papers around the headstone. "I drew a new picture. Look, it's us playing piano just like you did." William felt the air leave his lungs. The bouquet slipped from his numb fingers, landing on the ground with a dull thud. The girls turned at the same time, their brown eyes the same eyes Michael had, wide with surprise. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. William stared at the small faces that were perfect mirrors of each other, and something inside him began to crumble. In seconds, they sprang up in a whirlwind of red coats and fluttering papers. The one closest grabbed her sister's hand and both bolted down a side path, their hurried steps crunching the dried leaves. "Wait!" William tried to call, his rough voice failing him, but they were already gone among the tombstones, leaving only the echo of their footsteps and a scattered collection of drawings blowing in the wind. With trembling legs, William approached the grave. His eyes swept over the familiar inscription, "Michael James Anderson, beloved son and teacher," before focusing on the colored papers the girls had left behind. Kneeling with difficulty, he picked up the nearest drawing. Crayon lines depicted a scene that made his heart skip a beat, a family gathered around a piano. A tall, dark-haired figure seated at the instrument, 2 small girls in red beside him, and a woman with long hair smiling. At the top of the page, in uneven, childish handwriting, "Our family making music." William held the drawing with trembling hands, memories flooding his mind like a torrent. Michael at 7 twice, seated at the piano in the Anderson mansion, his small hands gliding over the keys with a natural talent that surprised everyone even then. Michael as a teenager, composing his own pieces during breaks in the studies William insisted were more important. Michael at 25A, standing in the mansion's library, his eyes the same eyes as those girls, shining with determination as he declared he would leave the company to become a music teacher, the last time William had seen those eyes. A sob escaped his throat, breaking the silence of the cemetery. The puzzle pieces began to fit together in his mind. The twins, the piano, Michael's absence in their lives. His son had built a family, had daughters, his granddaughters, and William had never known. Another drawing caught his eye. In it, the same figures, but the person at the piano was different, bigger, drawn with a wide smile. Below it, a phrase that blurred his vision with tears, "Daddy teaching us music in heaven." William let himself sink down onto the cold ground, not caring about his $10,000 Italian suit. His hands shook as he gathered each drawing, each piece of the life his pride and stubbornness had prevented him from knowing. The girls had Michael's smile in the drawings, that same smile he saw every morning in the portrait on his desk, the last photo he had taken of his son before the argument that tore them apart for good. How long had Michael tried to tell him about them? How many letters had William returned unopened? How many calls had he ignored, convinced he was right in his inflexibility? A stronger gust of wind blew, carrying with it a page of sheet music. William caught it in midair, immediately recognizing Michael's handwriting. It was an original composition, the kind of music his son loved to create. The title at the top made his heart tighten. For my little stars, Lily and Sophie. Lily and Sophie. His granddaughters had names. They were real, tangible, not just ghosts of missed possibilities. They played piano like their father. They came here to talk to Michael, bringing their art and music to share with him. William looked again at the marble headstone, seeing it with new eyes now. It wasn't just the marker of his greatest loss. It was a gathering place, a spot where two little girls kept their father's memory alive through music and colorful drawings. Slowly, he stood, carefully tucking each drawing into the inner pocket of his coat. His heart, so long hardened by bitterness and regret, now beat with a new urgency. He needed to learn more about them, about the life Michael had built, about the family he never knew. Gazing in the direction where the girls had fled, William made a silent promise. He would return the next day, and the day after that, and however many days it took to find out more about his granddaughters. This time, he wouldn't let pride stop him from knowing and loving his family. With one last look at Michael's grave, William began his walk back. The dry leaves crackled beneath his feet, and the October wind felt a little less cold now. In his pocket, the colorful drawings weighed like newly discovered treasures, promises of a future he had never imagined possible. The morning was just beginning, and with it a new story was unfolding at Green Haven Memorial Cemetery, a story of redemption, discovery, and the possibility of healing old wounds through the innocent love of two small artists in red coats, much too small for the season. William cancelled all his meetings for the week. For the first time in 40 years, the presidential suite at Anderson Enterprises remained empty, and his assistant received strict instructions to reschedule every appointment. The powerful CEO had a new priority, one that took him every morning to Green Haven Memorial Cemetery, long before sunrise. The large oak near Michael's grave provided the perfect hiding place. Its golden leaves and massive trunk gave enough cover for William to watch without being seen. There, in the morning shadows, he waited, his heart racing whenever he heard footsteps on the stone path. On the second morning of his vigil, they appeared. "Watch out for the flowers, Lily." Sophie's voice echoed through the silent cemetery. Mum said daisies were Dad's favorites after lilies. William watched, holding his breath, as the twins approached the grave. Today they wore blue coats, still too small, and carried a small wicker basket between them. Lily, whom he identified by the red ribbon in her braid, Sophie's was blue, arranged the daisies in a little glass vase. "Daddy," Sophie began, sitting on the dew-damp grass, "you won't believe what happened in piano class yesterday." William leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the rough bark of the oak tree. Every word from the girls was a treasure he collected eagerly. "Miss Clara said I played Für Elise almost perfectly," Sophie went on, her eyes shining. "Just like you used to play for us when we were babies. Mom always says you played it for us even while we were still in her belly." "And me," Lily interrupted, not wanting to be left out. "I memorized the entire first part of the Moonlight Sonata. Remember it was your favorite, Daddy?" Tears began to roll down William's cheeks before he could stop them. The Moonlight Sonata, the same piece Michael had played in his final recital before their fatal argument. William had refused to attend, claiming an important meeting. Now his granddaughter was playing the same melody, and he was hiding behind a tree, like an intruder in their lives. "Guess what else, Dad?" Sophie continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Mom sometimes cries when she plays this music. She thinks we don't notice, but I've seen it lots of times. She really misses you." William covered his mouth to muffle a sob. His legs gave out, and he slowly slid down the trunk of the oak, sitting on the damp ground. Tears were now streaming down his face, staining his impeccable Italian suit. "We miss you too," Lily added, gently touching the headstone. "But Mom says you're always listening to us play up there in heaven. It's true, right, Dad?" William buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. How could he have been so blind? So proud. His son had built a beautiful family, filled with music and love. Everything William once dismissed as a waste of time. Now these little girls were growing up without a father, and he, a foolish old man, was missing the best years of their lives. The visits continued in the days that followed. William learned that the girls attended Lincoln Public School, where they were top of their class. He discovered they lived in a small apartment on the east side of the city, far from the upscale neighborhoods where the Anderson family had always resided. He learned his daughter-in-law, Grace, worked 3 different jobs to support them. On one particularly cold morning, the girls brought something special, a small portable keyboard. "Miss Clara loaned it to us, Dad," Lily explained, turning on the instrument. "We really wanted to show you what we learned." William watched, his face still wet with tears, as his granddaughter's tiny hands moved over the plastic keys. The melody of Für Elise drifted through the cemetery, not played perfectly, but performed with so much love and dedication that it made his heart feel like it would burst. "This one's for you, Daddy," Sophie said at the end of their performance. "We practice every day. Someday we're going to play just like you." After the girls left that morning, William remained seated on the ground for a long time, his back resting against the oak, his face streaked with dried tears. Next to him on the grass lay an envelope the girls had left behind, a program for a recital at the community music school, scheduled for the end of the month. Lily and Sophie Anderson were listed among the performers. That evening, in his office atop the Anderson building, William opened his planner with trembling hands. Using the fountain pen he reserved for signing multi-million-dollar contracts, he crossed out all his commitments on the day of the recital. For the first time in his life, a few tears fell onto the paper, smudging the expensive ink. But William didn't care. There were far more precious things money could never buy. The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the sky with orange shades reminiscent of his granddaughter's 2 small coats. Somewhere on the east side, 2 little pianists were practicing on a borrowed keyboard, dreaming of the day they would play as well as the father they barely knew. William Anderson, the billionaire who had built an empire, was discovering now that his greatest riches had been hidden behind an oak tree at Green Haven Memorial Cemetery, in the imperfect notes of a Beethoven sonata played on a plastic keyboard. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry openly, not from sadness, but from a bittersweet mixture of regret and hope. 5 years earlier, the Anderson mansion gleamed under the April sun, its French windows reflecting the afternoon light like diamonds. In the 3rd-floor office, William surveyed the city stretching to the horizon, a city where half the skyscrapers bore his family name. The whiskey in his glass was still untouched when he heard the double doors open. "Dad?" Michael's voice echoed through the room. William did not turn immediately, his eyes fixed on the empire he had built brick by brick. His son had requested this meeting with unusual formality, and something in the pit of William's stomach told him he wouldn't like what was coming. "Sit down, Michael," William finally said, swiveling around in his Italian leather chair. Michael remained standing. At 32, he was the image of his father in youth, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same determined jaw. But there was something different in his eyes today, a resolve William had never seen before. "I'd rather stand for this," Michael replied, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he had inherited from his father. "What I have to say won't take long." William arched an eyebrow, placing his glass on the mahogany desk. Silence hung between them for a moment, filled only by the ticking of the Cartier clock on the wall, a gift for Michael's 20th birthday. I'm leaving the company. The words fell like stones into a still lake. William felt his fingers tighten around the arms of his chair, but he kept his expression neutral. Is this about that promotion? If you think you deserve more responsibility— No, Dad, Michael interrupted, something he rarely did. It's not about promotion or position. I'm leaving Anderson Enterprises altogether. I'm going to be a music teacher. The office plunged into a deathly silence. William stood up slowly, his gaze fixed on his son as if seeing him for the first time. A music teacher, he repeated, the words leaving his lips as though they were poison. You want to throw away 15 years of training, an MBA from Harvard, and your rightful place in this company to teach kids to play piano. It's more than that, Michael replied, his voice firm despite the obvious tension. I'm opening my own music school. I want to give opportunities to kids who would never have access. Absurd, William exploded, slamming his fist on the desk. The whiskey glass rattled, spilling a few drops on the financial report beneath it. You're my only son, Michael, the only heir to the Anderson legacy. Generations of our family have built this, and you want to throw it all away for a hobby. Michael stepped forward, his eyes shining with a mix of determination and hurt. A hobby? Is that what you've always thought of my music? Even when I won competitions, even when I got accepted to Juilliard, which I refused to let you attend, thank God. William cut him off. And it was the best decision I ever made for you. Look where you are now, executive vice president of the largest real estate developer in the country. Where I am? Michael let out a humorless laugh. I'm miserable, Dad. I spend my days in endless meetings, talking about profits and acquisitions when all I want is what you must do, William thundered. You have responsibilities, Michael, to the company, to the family, to our name. Michael shook his head, running his hands through his hair in frustration. What about my responsibility to myself, to my dreams, to— He hesitated for a moment, as if about to say more, Cal, but then held back. William walked around the desk, stepping closer to his son. Dreams don't build empires, Michael. Dreams don't keep 300 families employed. Dreams don't— No, Dad, Michael interrupted again, his voice gentler now. Dreams build lives, lives worth living. He pulled something from his suit pocket, a flash drive. Here's my resignation letter, along with all the reports for the projects I'm supervising. I've given a month's notice, more than enough time to train my replacement. William stared at the small object as if it were a bomb about to go off. If you walk out that door, his voice trembled slightly, if you abandon your position, there will be no coming back. Michael placed the flash drive on the desk and stepped back. That's always been the problem, hasn't it? Everything is about positions, about legacy, about what others will think. But what about what I think, what I feel? What you feel? William scoffed bitterly. Feelings don't pay the bills, Michael. Feelings don't build the future. No, Dad, feelings build families, something you seem to have forgotten a long time ago. The words struck William like a slap. For a moment, he saw not the executive vice president of Anderson Enterprises, but the 12-year-old boy who would play piano late into the night, dreaming of stages and applause. You're throwing your life away, William said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. Everything I built, it was for you. Michael smiled sadly. No, Dad, you built it for yourself, for your pride, for your legacy. I never asked for it. He turned toward the door, pausing for a moment with his hand on the handle. You know what's ironic? You always said music wouldn't pay the bills, but I'd rather live without money than keep living without dreams, without a soul. William felt something break inside him, pride, maybe, or fear. If you walk out that door, his voice was hoarse now, don't come back. Michael paused, his hand trembling slightly on the handle. For a moment, father and son locked eyes, 2 generations of Anderson, separated by a chasm of expectations and unrealized dreams. Goodbye, Dad. The doors closed with a soft click, nothing dramatic. There were no shouts, No door slamming, just silence. A silence that would echo for the next 5 years. William stood motionless for several minutes, staring at the closed doors. Finally, he staggered back to his chair and reached for the phone. "Margaret," his voice was metallic. "Prepare a statement for the board. Michael Anderson is no longer a part of Anderson Enterprises. Effective immediately." He hung up before his secretary could reply and, with trembling hands, poured himself another whiskey. The sun was beginning to set over the city, casting long shadows through the office windows. Somewhere below, Michael Anderson was walking away from the family mansion for the last time, carrying with him not just his dreams, but secrets his father would never discover in his lifetime. That night, for the first time in decades, the piano in the Anderson mansion's music room remained silent, its keys covered by a thin layer of dust that no one would dare disturb again. William stared into the emptiness of his office at Anderson Enterprises, the same office where, 5 years ago, he had held his last conversation with his son. The Cartier clock that he had given Michael still ticked away on the wall, a constant reminder of time that never returns. His fingers drummed on the mahogany desk, the exact spot where Michael had left the flash drive containing his resignation. "Feelings don't pay the bills," he had said on that fateful day. Now, gazing at the city through the same French windows, William prepared to find out exactly how his daughter-in-law was paying hers. "I have the information you requested, Mr. Anderson." Frank Martinez, a former police detective and now the most discreet private investigator in the city, slid a manila envelope across the desk. It was 5:30 a.m., a time chosen specifically to avoid inquisitive looks at the company. William opened the envelope with slightly shaking hands. The first photo showed a young woman, no older than 35, her brown hair pinned in a messy bun. She wore a simple but well-kept blazer and carried a folder of sheet music. "Grace Thompson Anderson," Martinez began in a professional tone. "Widow of Michael Anderson, 34 years old, graduated cum laude in piano from the Municipal Conservatory. She met your son when both volunteered at the St. Francis Community Center." The mention of the community center reminded William of Michael's words, "I'm opening my own music school. I want to give opportunities to kids who would never have access." So that's where it had all begun. "She holds 3 jobs," Martinez continued. "In the morning, from 7 to 11 a. Pansatu, she teaches private piano lessons in homes on the north side. From noon to 5 p.m. she works as a waitress at the Boulevard Cafe. And from 7 to 11 p.m. she's the resident pianist at Milano Restaurant." William closed his eyes for a moment. 4 hours of sleep a night, 6 days a week. That was how his son's widow lived, proving him wrong about that final conversation. Feelings might not pay the bills, but Grace was doing exactly that, fueled by her love for her daughters and for Michael's memory. What about the girls? Lily and Sophie Anderson, 5 years old. They attend Lincoln Public School during the day. While their mother works the night shift, they stay with Mrs. Eleanor Martinez, no relation to me, he added with a slight smile. A retired neighbor who charges very little to look after them. William moved on to the next photo. Grace was at the Boulevard Cafe, balancing 3 plates with a serene smile on her face. Her uniform was immaculately clean, but her shoes showed clear signs of heavy wear. "Keep discreet observation for a week," William instructed, his voice husky. "I want every detail of her routine." The next morning, William cancelled all his meetings, something that was becoming a habit ever since he discovered his granddaughters at the cemetery. He parked his Bentley 3 houses down from the Parkington residence, where Grace taught her first lesson of the day. Through the French windows, he could see his daughter-in-law seated at the piano, patiently guiding a young girl's hands over the keys. Her face lit up each time the student hit a correct note, the same expression he now recalled seeing on Michael's face whenever he talked about teaching music. "You're throwing your life away," he had told his son that last day. Watching Grace now, William realized how wrong he had been. Michael hadn't thrown his life away. He had dedicated it to something bigger than money or status, and Grace, his widow, carried on that legacy with a dignity that made William feel small in his $500,000 Bentley. At 11:15 a.m., Grace rushed out, hurrying to catch the bus downtown. William instructed his driver to follow discreetly. On the way, he saw her pull a small notebook from her bag and study sheet music, making use of every minute of the commute. At the Boulevard Cafe, he watched her quickly swap the blazer for a cafe uniform. Through the window, he saw her navigate between tables with natural grace, always smiling, always polite, even when a customer spilled coffee on her clean shirt. Summoning courage, William entered the cafe, disguised with dark glasses and a newspaper. He chose a discreet table, his heart pounding as Grace approached. "More coffee, sir?" she asked. Up close, he could see the dark circles carefully hidden beneath a thin layer of makeup. Even so, her eyes still held the same determined spark that reminded him so much of Michael it hurt. "Yes, please," he answered, lowering the newspaper strategically. Grace poured the coffee with precision, and for a moment that made William's heart nearly stop, she studied him with a curious expression. There was something in her gaze, a shadow of recognition that made him hold his breath. But then another customer called for her, and the moment passed. That evening, William took a discreet table at Milano restaurant. The establishment was elegant but not luxurious, the sort of place mid-level executives might bring their spouses on special occasions, nothing like the five-star restaurants he frequented. Grace sat at the piano promptly at 7 p.m. Her long black dress hid her worn shoes, and with her hair down and more elaborate makeup, she could easily pass for one of the customers. Her fingers glided over the keys with the same passion William remembered seeing in Michael. The first piece she played made William freeze in his seat, Moonlight Sonata, the same piece Michael had played in his last recital, the one William had refused to attend. "She's incredible, isn't she?" a waiter remarked, noticing his interest. "She's been with us for 4 years. Never late, never complains. And the tips left on the piano help with her daughter's music lessons." "Her daughters play too?" William asked, his voice raspy. "Oh, yes. 2 little pianists, just like their mother and father. God rest his soul." William watched as a drunk customer requested something more upbeat. Grace smiled politely and transformed the Chopin nocturne she was playing into a jazzy rendition that earned applause from the patrons. Adaptable, resilient, exactly as Michael had been. At 11:15 p.m., Grace left the restaurant. William followed in his car, watching her run to catch the last bus of the night. 20 minutes later, she got off in a modest neighborhood on the east side, hurrying 3 blocks to a small apartment building. On the 3rd floor, an older lady, Elena, he presumed, opened the door before Grace even knocked. "They just fell asleep," William heard the woman say. "Sophie wanted to stay up, but I told her you'd need them rested for breakfast." "Thank you, Elena." Grace's voice was tired but kind. "I don't know what we'd do without you." William remained in his car, watching the light come on in apartment 302. Through the window, he saw Grace approach a small sofa where 2 little figures slept bundled in blankets. She kissed each of her daughters, adjusted their covers, and then sat at a small digital piano in the corner of the room. Wearing headphones so as not to wake anyone, she began to practice. Midnight, and Grace Thompson Anderson was still working, preparing for her morning lessons. At the window of apartment 302, Grace kept practicing, her fingers moving silently over the keys of the digital piano. From where he sat, William could see sheet music hung on the walls, some framed, others just taped up. Among them, he recognized a few of Michael's compositions. One in particular caught his eye. It looked like the last piece Michael had composed. The title, visible even from that distance, read, "For Grace and Our Stars." The date at the top indicated it was written just a week before the accident. William felt something hot roll down his cheek and realized he was crying. The business card of Detective Martinez in his pocket seemed to weigh a ton. How long had Michael tried to tell him about her? About the twins? How many letters had he ignored? How many phone calls refused? The sky was beginning to lighten by the time William finally started his car. On the passenger seat, Martinez's report contained further details. Overdue rent, the girls' medical bills, Grace's dream of enrolling them in a proper music school. Grace Thompson Anderson had built an entire life from the ruins of Michael's dream. Without complaint, without asking for help, she kept the music alive for her daughters, even if it meant playing until her hands hurt and her feet bled. William glanced one last time at the lit window of apartment 302. In a few hours, Grace would wake at 5:30, make breakfast for the girls, and start the cycle again. Her daily symphony of love, dedication, and sacrifice. Feelings don't pay the bills, he had told Michael that last day. But Grace was proving otherwise every single day. Her feelings, her love of music, of Michael, of her daughters, were exactly what made her rise each morning to face 3 jobs with a smile. And for the first time in 5 years, William Anderson felt ashamed of his surname, not for what it meant in the business world, but for what it had cost him in terms of family. In his empty office, the Cartier clock went on with its relentless ticking, marking every lost moment, every missed opportunity. But perhaps it now also marked the beginning of a new melody. After a week following Grace's steps, William couldn't sleep anymore. Images of his daughter-in-law working tirelessly, of the twins in their 2 small coats, of the modest apartment on the east side of the city. All of it haunted him in the long hours of the night. It was on one of those sleepless nights that he found himself rummaging through the old cabinet in his home office. At the bottom of the last drawer, he found a shoebox his secretary had stored away years ago. Returned correspondences, read the label in careful cursive. William sat in his leather armchair, the box weighing heavily on his lap as though made of lead. One by one, he began to examine the letters. All were unopened, each stamped with "Return to Sender" in bold red. The first was dated just a week after their argument. "Dear Dad, I know you're furious with me, but I need you to understand. Music isn't just a hobby, it's who I am. Yesterday, I gave my first lesson at the community center. A 10-year-old girl played her first full piece and cried from happiness. Her smile meant more than any financial report I've ever signed." William had to stop for a moment, his hands trembling. How many times had Michael tried to explain this to him? How many times had he refused to listen? The next letter was from 3 months later. "Dad, the music school is beginning to take shape. I found the perfect space in the old theater on Madison Street. It needs renovations, but the potential is amazing. And I've met someone special. Her name is Grace, and she understands music the way I do. I wish so much that you could meet her. Grace." William ran his fingers over her name, recalling the gentle smile she still wore after exhausting work shifts. The letters continued, month after month. Michael wrote about the progress of the school, about his students, about how his love for Grace grew. William read every word now, absorbing all the news he had once rejected out of pride. Then he came to the letter that made his heart stop. "Dear Dad, I'm going to be a father. Grace is pregnant. The doctor says it's twins. I can't stop smiling. I know you're still angry with me, but they're your granddaughters. Please, Dad, don't let your pride stop you from meeting them." William let the letter fall, tears blurring his vision. Twins. Michael had tried to tell him about the twins, and he, in his unyielding stubbornness, had returned the news without even opening the envelope. The next letter turned his stomach. "Dad and the girls were born today, Lily and Sophie. We named Lily after Mom. They're perfect. Sophie has your eyes, did you know that? The same shade of blue. Grace says they already respond to music. I play the piano for them every night." More letters followed. Michael shared news of the girls' first steps, their first words, how they were fascinated by the piano. Every precious moment of his granddaughters' lives, rejected and returned unread, The last letter in the pile was different. The envelope was open, dated a week before the accident. "Dad, this is my last attempt." The girls are 4 now. Lily started playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the piano, and Sophie sings along. They ask about you. I showed them your picture, the one from the newspaper when the company turned 50. Sophie said you looked sad. She's right, isn't she? You always looked sad, even at the height of the company's success. I used to think it was disappointment in me, but now as a father I understand better. You were trapped, Dad. Trapped by expectations, by a legacy, by an idea of success that might not have been yours at all. Grace says it's never too late to start over. She's wise like that. Tomorrow I'm going to stop by your office. I didn't make an appointment. I know you wouldn't see me, but I have to try one last time. The girls deserve to meet their grandfather. And you deserve the joy of having them in your life. See you tomorrow, 175. Michael. William let out a deep sob. Michael never made it to the office the next day. The accident happened on the main avenue, just 2 blocks from Anderson Enterprises. It had been raining, the news said. The other driver was drunk. With trembling hands, William collected every letter, lining them up carefully. The sun was beginning to rise, bathing his office in golden light. In a few hours, Lily and Sophie would be waking in their small apartment, preparing for another day of school. Grace would be rushing to her first piano lesson of the day. He picked up the last letter again, rereading Michael's words. "It's never too late to start over," Grace had said. Could it be true? After so much time, so many returned letters, so much silence. William stood up, walking to the window. The city was slowly coming to life, the first rays of sunlight reflecting on the skyscrapers bearing the Anderson name. That entire empire he had built, which he had tried to force upon Michael, now felt hollow. In his pocket, the girls' recital program seemed to burn. Perhaps Grace was right. Maybe it was never too late to begin again. With reverent care, William stored the letters in his Italian leather briefcase. Tomorrow, he decided, he would visit the music school Michael had founded. It was time to see the real legacy his son had left behind, not in square footage or stock shares, but in musical notes and children's smiles. The old theater on Madison Street had lost much of its original splendor. The Art Deco facade, once imposing, showed clear signs of wear, and the sign reading Michael Anderson Music Academy had been hand-painted, the letters simple but carefully done. William adjusted the dark glasses and the plain cap he wore as a disguise. The letters he had spent the night reading still weighed heavily in his briefcase. One of them mentioned this place, the perfect space Michael had found to realize his dream. The interior of the building surprised William. Though modest, every inch had been thoughtfully used, filled with creativity and love. The old theater lobby had become a cozy waiting area with worn but clean sofas, and walls covered in photographs. William approached the photos, his heart racing. There was Michael, happier than William had ever seen him in the corridors of Anderson Enterprises. In one picture, he helped a little girl place her fingers on the piano keys. In another, he conducted a children's choir, his eyes shining with pure enthusiasm. "May I help you, sir?" William turned to find an older woman with grey hair watching him with a gentle smile. "I heard about the school," he managed, his voice rasping. "I'd like to learn a bit more." "Oh, of course. I'm Clara Thompson, the school's director since—" She hesitated for a moment, and William noticed her eyes welling up slightly. "Since we lost Michael." This place meant so much to him. Clara led William down the hallway, where old dressing rooms had been converted into practice rooms. From Wanda, he heard the sound of a child practicing Für Elise, the same piece Sophie had played in the cemetery. "Michael had a special gift," Clara continued, stopping in front of a larger photo. "He believed music shouldn't be a privilege for a few. Half of our students are on full scholarships." In the photo, Michael sat at a piano with a group of children gathered around him. William recognized the smile, the same one he now saw in his granddaughters. The kids adored him, Clara sighed. He had a unique way of teaching. He used to say everyone has their own music inside. They just need help finding it. They stopped by a room where a boy of about 12 was playing the violin. William watched through the glass, remembering when Michael was that age and begged for music lessons. "This is Tommy," Clara explained softly. Michael found him playing in a subway station with a broken violin. He bought him a new one the very next day. Now Tommy is one of our best students. William felt his throat tighten. How many lives had his son touched? How many stories like this had he missed because of his pride? At the end of the hall, one door stood out. "Michael Anderson Studio," read the plaque. Clara opened it reverently. It was a larger practice space with a grand piano at the center. Not as impressive as the one in the Anderson mansion, but William could see it had been chosen with love and care. "This was his favorite spot," Clara said softly. "He taught here every morning. In the afternoon, he'd leave the door open for students to practice. He said music needs space to breathe." William approached the piano, noticing the signs of wear on its keys. How many songs had been born here? How many dreams had found a home in this simple yet love-filled room? On the wall, one last photo drew his attention. Michael was at the piano, but not alone. Grace stood beside him, pregnant, her hands on her belly while he played. The date in the corner indicated it was taken a few months before the twins were born. "He was so happy when he found out they were 2 girls, Clara commented, following his gaze. "He used to say they danced whenever he played the piano." William removed his dark glasses, caring no more about the disguise. His hands trembled as he touched the photograph. "Music was his life," he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. "Yes," she agreed softly, "but you know what's most beautiful? His legacy lives on. His daughters have the same gift. Lily and Sophie, they're special, just like he was." William turned abruptly. You know them?" "Oh, yes. Grace brings them here whenever she can. They sometimes practice in this very room. It's as if Michael was still here, you know, in the way they smile when they play, in the sparkle in their eyes." William had to steady himself against the piano to keep from collapsing. Everything his son had built, all the love, all the dedication, all the music was here, alive and thriving in this simple school on Madison Street. "Thank you," he managed, for keeping this alive." Clara smiled, a sad, understanding smile. It was his dream. And dreams, well, they're stronger than death, don't you think? Dreams. The word echoed in William's mind as he left the school. Michael had died chasing his dream, but the dream had not died with him. It lived on in the children who studied here, in the stories they told about him, and especially in the small hands of his daughters, who carried on his music. William Anderson had built skyscrapers. Michael Anderson had built something much greater, a legacy of love and music that would echo long after the buildings turned to dust. Boulevard Cafe had its own understated charm on autumn mornings. Located between commercial buildings downtown, it served both hurried executives and retirees nursing a single cup of coffee for hours. For William Anderson, who once visited only 5-star establishments, this place represented a new world, one where his daughter-in-law worked tirelessly to support his granddaughters. He strategically chose a corner table, partly hidden by a large decorative fern. From there, he could watch Grace in her routine, admiring how she maintained her dignity and smile, no matter the challenges. His disguise was simple: reading glasses, a newspaper always open on the table, and clothes that bore no resemblance to his usual Italian suits. It was his 3rd day there when he heard the childish voices he knew so well from the cemetery. "Mommy!" Sophie and Lily entered the cafe running, still wearing their school uniforms. "Miss Clara said we can join the winter recital." Grace, who was balancing a tray with 3 cups of coffee, beamed at her daughters. "That's wonderful, my stars. But remember, quiet voices in the cafe, okay?" The girls nodded, taking seats on a small bench near the counter. William watched them pull music notebooks from their backpacks, studying their sheets while they waited for their mom to finish her shift. Now and then, their tiny fingers moved in the air as if playing an invisible piano. The recital cost $200 per student, William heard Sophie whisper to her sister. Do you think Mom can manage it? Maybe if we use the money in our piggy bank, Lily replied thoughtfully. And we can help Mrs. Elena with her plants. She always gives us some coins. William's heart tightened. $200, a sum he would spend on ties without a second thought, stood between his granddaughters and their musical dream. That was the moment fate decided to intervene. Sophie, reaching for her water bottle in her backpack, lost her balance on the bench. William saw it in slow motion, the girl falling, her eyes wide with shock. Without thinking, he moved with agility he didn't know he still possessed, catching her before she hit the floor. For a moment, he held his granddaughter in his arms, and the world seemed to stop. Her eyes, Michael's eyes, stared at him in surprise and curiosity. William felt tears welling up, but managed to hold them back. Are you all right, sweetheart? His voice came out hoarse, choked with emotion. Sophie! Grace appeared beside them, her face pale with worry. Oh my God, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. William helped Sophie up, his hands trembling slightly. The girl smiled at him. That smile that was a perfect copy of Michael's. Thank you, mister, she said. You were so fast, like a superhero. Grace knelt, checking her daughter. Did you hurt yourself, honey? No, Mom. The nice man caught me just in time. He's got ninja reflexes. Lily approached, studying William with interest. Your eyes are blue like ours, she observed, in that candid way children have. William felt his heart skip a beat. Grace noticed too, and for a moment both terrible and wonderful, he saw something pass across her eyes. Recognition, suspicion. But the moment passed. A customer called for her attention, and Grace had to leave, not without thanking him again with a gentle smile. Do you like music? William asked the girls, noticing their music notebooks. Yes, Sophie answered enthusiastically. We're going to join the winter recital, or at least we hope to. It's the most important recital of the year, Lily added, her face turning serious. Important people come to watch, people who offer scholarships at Riverside Music School. William knew Riverside well. It was the most prestigious music school on the East Coast, the kind of institution that could give the girls the musical education Michael had dreamed of for them. You must practice a lot, he commented, returning to his seat. Every day, Sophie said proudly. Mom always says talent is important, but dedication matters more. Just like Dad used to say, Lily chimed in, her expression growing thoughtful. Oh, he was a music teacher, you know, the best ever. William had to grip the table to stay upright. I'm sure he was, he managed to say. Grace returned at that moment, calling the girls, Time to go home, my stars. Let's thank this gentleman again. James, William improvised quickly. James Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, Grace smiled. Sophie has a knack for accidents. It was lucky you were here. It wasn't luck, William wanted to say. It was destiny. It was the universe giving him a second chance. After they left, he remained seated for a long time, his cup of coffee growing cold and untouched. His mind was racing, formulating a plan. The next morning, the director of the music school where the girls studied received an interesting phone call. An anonymous benefactor wanted to set up a scholarship fund, with one specific condition. Sophie and Lily Anderson should be the first recipients. But sir, the director argued, we need documentation, a name for the records. The Wilson Foundation will take care of everything, William replied, using the alias he had created at the cafe. The important thing is that the girls can attend the winter recital, and please ensure they have the best teachers. Money is no object. In the weeks that followed, William established a routine. Every afternoon at 2 p.m., he was at the Boulevard Cafe. Sometimes Grace served him. Other times he watched from a distance as the girls did their homework on the stool at the counter. He discovered Sophie had a contagious laugh and loved princess stories. Lily was quieter, but her eyes lit up whenever she talked about music. Both had Michael's natural gift for the piano, and also Grace's tireless determination. One day, he overheard Grace talking with a co-worker during her break. "I don't understand," she said, sounding emotional. "First the mysterious scholarship, and now this. The director said someone donated 2 new pianos specifically for the girls' lessons. Maybe they have a guardian angel," her colleague suggested. Grace gazed out the window, thoughtful. "Michael always said music has the power to create miracles. Maybe he's still watching over the girls somehow." William lowered his newspaper, hiding the tears forming in his eyes. He wasn't a guardian angel, just a grandfather trying to mend years of mistakes, one small piece at a time. In his leather briefcase, he no longer carried only million-dollar contracts, but also the weekly reports he requested from the music school about his granddaughter's progress. Every little victory they achieved was recorded and treasured. The first time Sophie played a sonata flawlessly, Lily's solo in the school choir, their rising scores in music theory. Yet it was torture too. Every smile they offered him at the cafe, every excited "Hi, Mr. Wilson," reminded him he was a stranger in their lives, an imposter living in the shadows of the life he could have had if not for his pride. At night, alone in his empty mansion, William found himself playing the old piano in the music room, the same one Michael had loved so much. The keys, long silent, seemed to awaken under his tentative fingers. He remembered the melodies his son had played, the songs he had never allowed himself to truly hear. The winter recital drew closer, bringing the opportunity that might change the girl's future. William had already discreetly arranged with Riverside Music School, 2 guaranteed spots, all expenses covered by an anonymous benefactor. But as he watched his granddaughters practice at the cafe, their small faces focused on the sheet music, a question haunted him. Would it be enough to love them from a distance? How much longer could he keep up this charade, this hidden love? Grace passed his table several times a day, always with a kind smile, always grateful to the man who had saved her daughter from a fall. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. But sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, William caught her looking at him with a curious expression, like someone solving a puzzle. "You sure do like coffee, Mr. Wilson," she remarked one day, refilling his cup for the 3rd time. "The coffee is good," he answered gently, "but the company is better." Grace smiled, and for a moment William saw what Michael must have seen in her, that quiet strength, that ability to make music out of life's fragments. "The girls like you," she said. "They say your eyes are kind." William nearly dropped his cup. Kind. That was how his late wife used to describe Michael's eyes. "They're special children," he managed to say. "They are," Grace agreed, her voice tinged with a blend of pride and melancholy. "Just like their father." William watched her walk away, his heart heavy with secrets and regrets. In his mind, Michael's voice echoed from the letters he'd never opened. They deserve to meet their grandfather. And you deserve the joy of having them in your life. The autumn sun streamed through the cafe windows, creating a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. At the counter, Sophie and Lily continued studying their music sheets, occasionally sending smiles his way. And William Anderson, the man who had built an empire on certainties, found himself in uncharted waters, torn between his overwhelming desire to embrace his granddaughters and the paralyzing fear of losing the fragile connection he had built. The first cough went unnoticed. At the Boulevard Cafe, William watched Sophie and Lily in their usual routine on the bench by the counter. It was a grey November afternoon, the sky threatening snow. Sophie seemed quieter than usual, occasionally pressing her hand to her chest as she studied her music. "Sophie, are you okay?" Lily asked, noticing her sister looked paler than usual. "Just a little tired," Sophie replied, forcing a smile. "Maybe it's because we practiced so much for tomorrow's performance." William frowned behind his newspaper. Something in her voice sounded off, weaker, strained. Before he could think more on it, Grace arrived to take the girls home. The next morning, His usual chair at the cafe remained empty. Something had held him up at the office, a vital meeting about a merger the company had planned for months. It was late afternoon when he finally arrived at the boulevard. The atmosphere was different. A tension hung in the air, and William soon discovered why. Grace had to leave early, one of the waitresses told him. Little Sophie fainted during the school performance. They took her to Central Hospital. William felt the blood freeze in his veins. How is she? We don't really know. Looks like it's a severe pneumonia. Grace is frantic. You know how the basic health plan is. He didn't wait to hear more. Within minutes, he was in his car, driving like a madman toward the hospital. On the way, he made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, another to the hospital director, an old business acquaintance, and a third to his secretary, cancelling all his commitments for the week. Central Hospital was a stark contrast to the private clinics William was used to. In the crowded ER, he found Grace sitting in a plastic chair, Lily sleeping in her lap. She still wore her cafe uniform, stained with coffee, no time even to change clothes. Severe bacterial pneumonia, William overheard a doctor explaining to her. She needs immediate admission and intensive antibiotic treatment. We also detected a cardiac complication that might require a minor surgery. How much? Grace's voice sounded strangled. How much will it cost? The doctor hesitated. With all the tests, medications, and possible surgery, around $60,000. William saw Grace's face go white. $60,000, the price of the watch on his wrist. For her, an impossible sum. I can take out a loan, she began, her voice trembling. Maybe sell the piano. Not the piano, Mom. Lily woke in alarm. It's the only memory we have of Dad. William could no longer stand by. He stepped away discreetly and made another call. 15 minutes later, a social worker entered the waiting area. Mrs. Anderson, I have wonderful news. Your daughter has been selected for the Children's Medical Assistance Program. All treatment costs will be covered. Grace blinked, confused. But I never applied for any program. It's a new hospital project, the social worker explained gently. For special cases like Sophie's, don't worry about the expenses. Just focus on her recovery. William watched from a distance as Grace was led to Sophie's room. Through the small window, he saw his granddaughter hooked up to tubes and monitors, looking even smaller among all that equipment. The days dragged on. William practically moved into the hospital, always staying at a distance, always observing. Grace spent her nights in the uncomfortable chair beside the hospital bed, holding Sophie's small, feverish hand. Lily alternated between the hospital and Mrs. Elena's home, her eyes red from crying. One night, when the corridor was quiet except for the beeping monitors, everything changed. Sophie had a crisis. Alarms blared, doctors ran, and Grace was pushed out of the room. William saw her collapse in the hallway, sobbing, and something inside him broke. He could no longer remain a mere shadow in their lives. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. Grace looked up, recognizing the Mr. Wilson from the cafe. What are you? Grace, he interrupted gently, his voice trembling. My name is not James Wilson. She frowned in confusion. William took a deep breath, removing the glasses he wore as a disguise. I'm William Anderson, Michael's father. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace froze, her eyes wide with shock. Recognition and disbelief mixed in her expression. You, she whispered. All this time at the cafe, the scholarships, the hospital program. William nodded, tears running freely down his face. Why? Grace asked, her voice a blend of hurt and anger. Why now, after all these years? Because I was a proud fool, he answered, his voice breaking. Because when I finally saw the girls at the cemetery, I realized all the time I wasted, all the letters I never read, all the moments I threw away. Grace stood abruptly, putting distance between them. The letters. Michael wrote so many letters to you. He tried so hard. I know, William sobbed. I finally read them. Too late, I know, but he was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. The doctor emerged, looking exhausted but relieved. She's stable now. The fever is starting to subside. Grace covered her face with her hands, crying tears of relief. William took a step toward her, hesitant. Grace, please. I know I don't deserve it, but Sophie, she's my granddaughter. Let me help. Not as a stranger, not in the shadows anymore. She looked at him for a long moment, years of hurt and resentment warring with the exhaustion of the moment. Michael died trying to talk to you, she said at last, her voice harsh. He never gave up trying to make you see that music wasn't just a hobby. It was his life, his soul. And I was too blind to see, William admitted, but now I do. I see it in the girls, in how they play, in their love of music. They're so much like him. Grace leaned against the wall, looking suddenly very tired. How long have you been watching them? Since that day at the cemetery. When I saw them leaving drawings at Michael's grave, it was like my heart started beating again after 5 years. A sound from the room interrupted them. Sophie's weak voice calling, "Mommy." Grace hesitated at the door, then turned to William. "This doesn't mean everything is all right," she said firmly. "You hurt Michael deeply. You ignored us for years. I know. But," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "Sophie needs all the help she can get now, and you're his father." It was a fragile truce, born of necessity and exhaustion, but it was a start. May I see her?" William asked tentatively. Grace studied him for a long moment, then gave a faint nod. "She still thinks you're Mr. Wilson from the cafe," she warned. "For now, let's keep it that way. She needs to focus on getting better first." William agreed, grateful for any crumbs of closeness he could have. He followed Grace into the room, where Sophie lay awake, her eyes still bright with fever. "Mr. Wilson," she smiled weakly, "you came to visit me." "Of course I did, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but Mom said I'll be able to play piano again soon." "Yes, you will," he promised, holding her tiny, feverish hand. "You'll play all the songs you want." Grace watched from the chair, her eyes wet with tears. For a moment, she could see Michael there, in the way William held Sophie's hand, in how his voice softened when he spoke to her. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the city in a white blanket of possibilities. In room 302 of Central Hospital, 3 generations of the Andersons were hesitantly beginning to rebuild the bridges long burned by pride and time. Sophie's recovery turned room 302 of Central Hospital into a sort of neutral territory, where old hurts hesitantly gave way to new possibilities. William established a routine that Grace, after some initial resistance, began to accept as part of their days. Every morning at 7:30 he arrived, carrying coffee and fresh croissants from Saint-Marie Boulangerie, the same French bakery where, during his observations at the café, he'd noticed Grace buying a single croissant once a month, always saving half for later, a small luxury she allowed herself. Now she accepted the still warm pastries with a timid smile, a silent gesture of gratitude worth more than 1,000 words. "You always arrive at coffee time," Sophie remarked one morning, her voice stronger than in previous days. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, saying the minor heart surgery had been a complete success. Just like at the Boulevard Café. William exchanged a quick glance with Grace, who was knitting a sky-blue scarf for Sophie, the same shade as the Anderson eyes, though she hadn't mentioned that detail. "Well," he replied, adjusting the glasses he now wore more out of habit than disguise, "some routines are too good to change." "Like stories," Lily exclaimed from the sofa bed where she slept with her mom. "You always have a new story about Dad." Grace paused her knitting for a moment, her eyes meeting William's. Over the past weeks, she had begun to notice how carefully he chose each story, sharing memories that highlighted Michael's musical side, as though trying to fix the distorted image he once held of his son. "Mr. Wilson," Sophie called, adjusting herself on the pillows. "Tell us another one." About when Dad was little like us. William hesitated, seeking approval in Grace's gaze. She gave a slight nod, her fingers returning to the knitting needles. Well, there was a time when your dad was exactly your age, he began, but Grace interrupted softly. Actually, she said quietly, surprising everyone. May I share a story too? About how I met your dad. The girls straightened eagerly. It was rare for Grace to talk about the past, especially how she met Michael. William felt his heart race. There was so much he didn't know about their story. It was my 7th birthday, Grace began, lowering her knitting again. I'd just gotten a scholarship for piano lessons at the community center. Remember I told you Grandma Rose worked 3 cleaning jobs so I could have music lessons? The girls nodded. William felt a pang in his chest. While he had denied Michael's musical dream, other families sacrificed everything for such opportunities. I'd never seen a real piano before, Grace continued, a soft smile curling her lips. Just that old keyboard in our neighborhood church. I was so nervous my hands shook when I walked into the classroom. What about Dad? Sophie prodded, eyes shining. Your dad was teaching a group of young kids. He did something magical. He turned scales into little musical stories. This note is looking for her friend, he'd say, playing middle C. And look, she found her up here, he'd continue, hitting the next octave. William closed his eyes, remembering the sound of children's laughter coming from the music room in the mansion many years ago. Back then, he considered it a distraction from the important studies he had planned for Michael. When he saw me standing at the door, frozen with fear, Grace said, he gave me that special smile of his, you know, the one you both inherited, and said, "Come on, let's make music together." Just like he used to say to us, Lily exclaimed. Exactly, Grace smiled. That was his way. He turned fear into music, sorrow into melody. He always said music wasn't about perfection, William muttered to himself. It was about connection. Grace looked surprised. Yes, that was one of the first things he taught new students. It took me a long time to understand what he meant, William admitted, his voice thick. Too long. A thoughtful silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft clack of Grace's knitting needles. Days turned into weeks. Sophie regained enough strength to take short walks down the corridor, always with William on one side and Lily on the other, forming a little procession that made the nurses smile. During those walks, he learned Lily dreamed of composing her own music like her father, and Sophie kept a secret notebook where she drew every butterfly she saw. Grace watched these interactions with both caution and hope. She saw how William memorized every detail about the girls, how Lily wrinkled her nose when concentrating, exactly like Michael, or how Sophie tapped invisible scales on her lap when anxious. It was during one of these walks that William finally gathered the courage. "Grace," he said, while the girls were distracted counting tiles on the floor. "There's something I'd like to propose." She stiffened visibly, years of mistrust not easily erased. "Sophie will be discharged soon," he continued gently. I'd like to bring you all to see the Anderson mansion, Michael's room. It's exactly as he left it." Grace turned pale. "I'm not sure we're ready for that." "Please," he insisted, his voice almost a whisper. "There are things I need to show you. Things I need to say. Michael, he deserves it. You deserve it." Grace looked at her daughters playing at the end of the corridor. So much like their father, it sometimes hurt to see. "I'll think about it," she promised. The following week, on a cold December Sunday, William's black Bentley pulled up in front of the modest building where Grace and the girls lived. Sophie and Lily, in their best dresses, gifts William had insisted on buying to celebrate her recovery, could barely contain their excitement. "It's like a Disney movie," Sophie whispered, as the gates of the Anderson mansion opened automatically. The house was as imposing as ever, its white columns rising majestically against the winter sky. William watched the girls stare in awe at everything, their wide eyes reflecting the crystals of the grand chandelier in the entrance hall. Grace walked in silence, taking in every detail. Michael had described this house so many times in his stories, that she could almost see him as a teenager running down these stairs, rushing to his music lessons. William led them through the hallways, each step echoing with memories. Finally, they stopped in front of a carved oak door etched with musical notes, an art project Michael himself had done in his spare time. "This was his room," Grace murmured, recognizing the carvings from Michael's descriptions. William turned the knob with shaking hands. The room was exactly as Michael had left it 5 years ago. Sheet music scattered on the desk, a guitar propped in the corner, posters of famous composers on the walls. The air had that stale smell of a long-closed space, yet it still carried traces of the cologne Michael used. The girls entered hesitantly, touching each object reverently, as if in a sacred museum. Lily found a worn-out teddy bear sitting on the bed, its brown fur faded by time and love. "Mozart," William said softly, his voice laden with emotion. "Michael's companion whenever he practiced piano. Your grandmother, my Elizabeth, gave it to him when he was 4. He said Mozart helped him not miss any notes." Grace stopped in front of a photo on the wall. Michael at 15, seated at the piano in the music room, his face lit with that radiant smile she knew so well. "It was his first official recital," William explained, coming closer. "He'd just turned 15. He chose Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata. He was so nervous his hands shook at breakfast. Elizabeth practically forced him to eat." He paused, lost in the memory. "But when he started playing, it was as if the whole world stopped to listen. That was the first time I truly realized he had something special, something beyond mere talent." "What did you do?" Grace asked, her voice tinged with the bitterness she couldn't hide. William sank heavily onto Michael's old bed, picking up the worn teddy bear. "I enrolled him in extra math and business classes the very next day," he confessed, his voice cracking, "because I was so determined he would follow in my footsteps, that he'd take over the company, that he'd be the heir I planned for, that I needed." The girls, sensing the shift in the room's mood, naturally moved closer. Sophie climbed onto the bed beside him, while Lily sat on the floor at his feet. "Michael was different from me in every way," William continued, absently stroking the teddy bear's worn fur. "Where I saw numbers, he saw melodies. Where I planned acquisitions, he dreamed of symphonies. Where I built walls, he built bridges through his music." His voice faltered. Grace, still standing by the photo, had silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "He tried telling me so many times," William went on after a pause. "About you, Grace. About how he fell in love not only with your music, but with your heart. About the music school he wanted to open. How teaching kids made him happier than the company ever could. But I didn't listen. I was so fixed on my vision of what he should be that I couldn't see who he really was." William took something from his pocket, Michael's last letter, now creased from repeated reading. The paper's edges were worn, stained by tears in places. "When he told me he was leaving the company, I threatened him. I said if he walked out that door, he shouldn't come back. What kind of father does that to his own son? What kind of man chooses pride over love?" With the pure innocence of her 5-year-old heart, Sophie took his hand. "But you're here now, Mr. Wilson. Or should I say, Grandpa?" William froze, glancing at Grace in panic. She wiped away her tears and nodded slightly. "Yes, sweetheart," she said gently. "He's your grandfather. Your dad's father. That's why your eyes are the same color as ours," Lily exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "And why you were always at the cafe watching us, and why you got so sad when you saw our drawings at the cemetery." "Forgive me," William sobbed, pulling the twins into a hug for the first time. "Forgive me for taking so long to find you, for wasting so much time. For being such a fool." Grace approached slowly, settling into the chair at the desk where Michael had spent hours composing. "Michael talked about you a lot, you know," she said after a long moment. "Even after the fight, even after all the returned letters, he used to say that one day you'd understand. That once you had grandchildren, maybe. He was much wiser than me," William interjected, still holding the girls. He always was. Grace, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, or his, but these girls, they're all I have left of him. Please, let me be part of their lives. Your lives. Grace glanced around the room, at the yellowed sheet music, the silent guitar in the corner, the photographs telling the story of a boy who became a musician despite all odds. Michael believed in second chances, she said at last. It was one of the first things he taught his students. When you hit a wrong note, he'd say, don't stop, keep going. Sometimes the mistakes lead us to more beautiful melodies than we could have imagined. William nodded, tears rolling freely down his cheeks. He was always the best of us. Is the piano still in the music room? Grace asked suddenly. Yes, William replied, surprised. No one has touched it since that day. Girls, Grace called, standing up. How about we show your grandpa what you've been practicing? The twins leapt up excitedly, each taking one of William's hands. Come on, Grandpa. Sophie tugged him along, her energy renewed after her hospital stay. We can play the song Dad composed for us. The one Mom taught us. As he was led by his granddaughters through the mansion's corridors, William felt something shift inside him. The weight of 5 years of regret began, slowly, to turn into hope. In the music room, Grace drew back the heavy velvet curtains, letting in winter light for the first time in years. The grand piano, covered by a white sheet, stood waiting in its corner. When William removed the cloth, a cloud of dust danced in the sunlight, like musical notes hanging in the air. Ready? Lily asked her sister, taking a seat at the piano. Sophie nodded, positioning herself beside her. Their small hands found the keys with a familiarity that made William's heart ache with emotion. The first notes of For My Little Stars, Michael's final composition, filled the room. Grace closed her eyes, letting tears run freely. William watched his granddaughters play, seeing Michael in every movement, every focused smile, every little gesture he himself had never truly noticed before. It was a simple, deeply emotional melody, full of love and hope, the kind of music Michael had always wanted to create. Not for show or applause, but to touch hearts and build bridges between souls. When the last note faded into silence, the quiet that followed was no longer heavy with regret or blame. It was a silence filled with possibilities, promises, bridges being rebuilt, note by note. Bravo, William whispered, his voice trembling. Bravo, my little stars. Grace approached, resting a hand on his shoulder. He'd be happy to see this, she said softly. All of us here, making music together. It's all he ever wanted. William covered her hand with his own, nodding, unable to speak. At the piano, Sophie and Lily began another piece, their clear laughter mixing with the notes. The Anderson mansion, for so long a mausoleum of painful memories and broken dreams, was slowly coming back to life. And at the center of it all, an old piano bore witness to the start of a new melody, a symphony of forgiveness, healing, and love, played by 4 hearts finally finding harmony. You know, Grace said quietly, as they watched the girls play, Michael always said music can heal any wound if we give the melody enough time. William smiled through his tears, watching his granddaughters at the piano, the living legacy of his son. As always, he replied, Michael was right. The grand hall of the Michael Anderson Music Academy was packed that April afternoon. Extra chairs had been placed along the side aisles, yet people still stood, leaning against the paneled walls. The air was charged with that electric anticipation unique to special performances. William Anderson adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, his restless fingers betraying the nervousness he tried to hide. Beside him, Grace gently touched his arm, a comforting gesture that would have been unthinkable a few months earlier. They're ready, she whispered, a soft smile on her lips. They've practiced so hard they could play that piece in their sleep. William nodded, speechless. His eyes went back to the program in his hands, stopping at the final item on the list. A letter to Daddy. Original composition by Lily and Sophie Anderson. 5 years. 5 years since Michael had passed, leaving a void William thought impossible to fill. 5 years since that last conversation in the Anderson Enterprises office, where harsh words and pride had created an apparently insurmountable chasm. Yet here he was now, seated beside the daughter-in-law he had come to admire and love like a daughter, about to watch his granddaughters debut their first original composition. Destiny, William thought, had a peculiar sense of irony. The lights in the hall slowly dimmed, and Clara Thompson, the Academy's director, took the stage. Her navy blue gown shimmered in the spotlight, creating an almost ethereal effect as she approached the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," her gentle voice resonated. "Tonight is very special for our Academy. Not just because we celebrate another spring recital, but because today marks 5 years since we lost someone very dear." William felt Grace squeeze his hand. The grip was firm, as though both needed that anchor to withstand the surge of emotion any mention of Michael always stirred. Michael Anderson was not only an exceptional music teacher, Clara went on, her voice faltering a bit. He was a dreamer who turned notes into possibilities, who heard music where others heard only noise. He believed every child deserved the chance to find their own melody. The stage lights glowed softly, revealing the magnificent Steinway grand piano Michael had loved so much. Beside it stood 2 small figures in white dresses with blue sashes, the same color as the Anderson eyes waiting for their turn. "Tonight," Clara continued, "his daughters, Lily and Sophie Anderson, will perform an original composition, a letter in musical form to the father who, I'm sure, is listening from a very special place." William held his breath as his granddaughters approached the piano. Lily sat first, adjusting the bench with Michael's same meticulousness. Sophie stood beside her, tiny hands clasped in front of her in a gesture so reminiscent of Grace. "Good evening," Lily began, her voice clear and confident, just like her father's. "The piece we're playing tonight is special. We started writing it when we visited Dad at the cemetery, and we finished it with help from Mom and Grandpa." William felt tears begin to form. He vividly recalled the evenings spent at the piano with the girls, helping them shape their musical ideas into notes on paper. It was like having Michael back, in each expression of concentration, each smile of discovery when they found the perfect chord. "Our music has 3 parts, Sophie explained, taking over with the same poise as her sister. "The first part is about missing him, the second is about remembering, and the last is about love and forgiveness." Her final words were directed straight at William, and he had to swallow a sob. Grace squeezed his hand harder, and he sensed she was crying as well. Lily placed her fingers on the keys, and Sophie sat next to her. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the hall. Then the first notes began to flow. The opening melody was soft, almost tentative, like children's footsteps in a quiet cemetery. William recognized the pattern immediately. It was the lullaby he used to sing to Michael when he was small, before music became a battleground between them. The girls had transformed that simple tune into something deeper, weaving in minor notes that spoke of loss and longing. Gradually, the music changed. The second part introduced brighter themes, musical reminiscences of the stories Grace told about Michael. William could hear echoes of his son's favorite pieces, tiny snippets of the Moonlight Sonata, fragments of Furelise, all masterfully woven into a sonic tapestry that spoke of happy memories and everlasting love. But the third part was what finally broke something inside him. The girls started playing a melody he hadn't heard in decades, the first piece he himself had composed, long before becoming the ruthless businessman, back when he still harbored his own musical dreams. It was a song he had played only once, for Elizabeth, the night Michael was born. How had they found it? Then he remembered the old journal of sheet music he'd found with Grace while organizing Michael's room. His son had kept that single page of music all those years, even after the fights and harsh words. The old tune morphed into something new under the girls' hands. They interlaced notes of hope among the old phrases, creating a bridge between past and present, between loss and renewal. It was a piece about forgiveness, about second chances, about a love that endures even the greatest storms. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Then, like a wave crashing on shore, the audience erupted in applause. William watched his granddaughters rise, taking the bow Michael always said was the most important part of any performance. Because that's when we thank the music for lending us its magic, he used to say. Grace was the first to reach the stage, enveloping her daughters in a tight hug. William remained seated for a moment, trying to control his emotions. When he finally stood, his legs trembled. "Grandpa," Sophie called, running toward him the moment she spotted him approaching. "Did you recognize the last part?" "Yes, my star," he said, voice hoarse. "I recognized every note." "We found it in Dad's notebook," Lily explained, joining them. "He wrote a note saying it was the prettiest song he'd ever heard." William pulled them both into a tight hug, no longer caring about the tears streaming down his face. Over their heads, his eyes found Grace's, who smiled through her own tears. I need a moment," he said softly after a while. "Do you mind if I—" "Go," Grace replied, understanding instantly. "We'll handle the congratulations here. Take all the time you need." The cemetery was quiet at that hour, the late afternoon sun bathing the headstones in golden light. William walked the now familiar path to Michael's grave, his steps heavy with all the words unsaid, all the hugs not given, all the music unheard. The Italian marble headstone was adorned with fresh flowers, daisies and lilies, Michael's favorites. William recognized the small bouquets made by the twins, each blossom chosen with the same care they gave to their piano notes. Slowly, he knelt on the grass, ignoring the expensive Italian suit. His hands trembled as he touched the cold marble, fingers tracing the engraved letters of his son's name. "Michael," he whispered, voice breaking. "My son, my music boy." The tears came then, hot and thick, carrying years of guilt and pain. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "For every time I didn't listen, for every time I chose numbers over notes, for every moment wasted trying to make you someone you weren't." The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby oaks, creating its own quiet melody, as though nature wanted to accompany his words. "Your girls, they're incredible, Michael. So talented, so full of life and music, just like you were. Grace. She's the strongest person I've ever met. She kept your music alive, even when it hurt the most." William took an old sheet of music from his pocket, his first and only composition, yellowed by time. "You kept this," he murmured, carefully unfolding the page. "After all I said, after how I acted, you still held on to this piece of the father I used to be, the man who once dreamed of music the same way you did." His fingers traced the notes on the page, remembering the night he wrote them, seated at his parents' old piano, his heart overflowing with love for the tiny miracle just born. "I promise you, son," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I promise I'll take care of them. I'll make sure your daughters get every opportunity you dreamed for them. I'll love Grace like the daughter she should have been to me all along. And above all," he paused, drawing a deep breath, "I promise I'll keep your music alive. Not just through the girls, but for every child who dreams of melodies and can't afford them. Your dream of a music school for everyone. I'll make it happen, Michael. Bigger than you ever imagined." William remained there a long time, talking to his son as he never had in life. He recounted the small daily discoveries with the twins, how Lily scrunched her nose exactly like Michael when concentrating, how Sophie had his same radiant smile whenever she nailed a tricky passage. The sun was setting when he finally rose, his legs numb from kneeling so long. Before leaving, he took an envelope from his other pocket. "These are the foundation papers," he explained, placing the envelope among the flowers. "The Michael Anderson Foundation for Music Education. Grace will be the director, of course. "We're going to make your school something extraordinary, son. Every kid who dreams of music will have a chance, no matter where they come from." With a final touch on the headstone, William turned to go. The wind blew more strongly for a moment, and he could have sworn he heard, in the rustling leaves, the distant notes of a familiar melody. 3 months later, the old Michael Anderson Music Academy was unrecognizable. The historic building had been fully restored, preserving its Art Deco charm but adding modern facilities and top-of-the-line equipment. New classrooms had been built, each equipped with quality pianos and technology for recording and distance learning. Yet the heart of the school, the room where Michael had once given lessons, remained untouched. The same Steinway grand piano, now flawlessly refurbished, still held its place of honor. The photographs on the walls were newly framed, and new pictures had joined them: Sophie and Lily at their recital, Grace conducting the new children's choir, William seated at the piano with his granddaughters. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the school was technically closed. But for the Anderson family, the doors were always open. The sound of music and laughter echoed down the empty corridors, coming from Michael's room. William sat at the piano, Lily on one side and Sophie on the other. Grace watched from an armchair in the corner, the same spot Michael used to occupy when listening to his students practice. "No," William laughed, gently repositioning Sophie's fingers on the keys. "Like this, see? It's just like your dad always said. Let your fingers dance on the keys, don't force them." "Like a butterfly?" Sophie asked, her eyes bright. "Exactly like a butterfly," William smiled. "Did you know that's how I taught your dad? He had the same problem at first, always pressing too hard." "Tell us more," Lily asked, resting her head on her grandfather's shoulder. "What was Dad like when he was learning?" William exchanged a glance with Grace, who nodded encouragingly. Talking about Michael still hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt now, softer, sweeter, laced with love and longing instead of regret. "Well," he began, his hands instinctively finding the keys, "there was one song in particular he loved when he was your age. A simple melody, but he played it in such a special way. His fingers started dancing over the keyboard, and a gentle tune filled the room. It was a simplified version of Clair de Lune, the first classical piece Michael ever learned in full. He practiced this piece for hours," William continued, smiling at the memory. "Sometimes I'd hear him late at night, playing very softly so he wouldn't wake anyone, but I was always awake, always listening." "Did you go watch him play?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. William stopped for a moment, his features turning wistful with a blend of regret and affection. "Not as often as I should have, but now I don't miss a second of music." Grace rose from her armchair and joined them at the piano. Above it, a new photo had been added to the collection, Michael as a teenager at the piano, wearing that radiant smile. Beside it, one of the girls' drawings was framed in gold. The entire family gathered around a piano, including an angelic figure hovering above, a ghostly Michael smiling down on his reunited family. "Girls," Grace said softly, "how about you show Grandpa that new song you're composing?" Their little faces lit up. William shifted on the bench to give his granddaughters more space. Lily straightened the sheet music, still scribbled with childish handwriting, while Sophie adjusted her posture exactly as Michael used to. "It's a surprise we're working on," Lily explained, exchanging a conspiratorial look with her sister. "We call it Grandpa Pianist's Song." William felt his heart skip a beat. The first notes began to flow, and he recognized the themes immediately. Bits of his old composition for Michael, woven with the melody their father loved so much, all merged into something fresh and profoundly moving. Grace stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder as the girls played. The song spoke of loss and reunion, of regret and forgiveness, of a love that transcends time and even death. It was their entire story, the Anderson family, told through the notes Michael adored. When the final note ended, the silence was charged with emotion. William opened his arms and his granddaughters rushed into his embrace. "Grandpa Pianist," Sophie giggled, using the nickname she had coined. "Did you like it?" "Like it?" William's voice shook. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Grace joined the group hug, and for a moment they stayed like that, connected by the love and music Michael had left as his greatest legacy. A ray of late afternoon sun shone through the high window, creating a pattern of golden light across the piano. William looked up, gazing at the sky beyond the window, and smiled softly. "Thank you, son," he whispered. "Thank you for this second chance, for this wonderful family, for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." As if in response, a gentle breeze slipped through the slightly open window, making the sheet music on the piano dance. The girls giggled, saying it was their dad sending a kiss. Grace wiped away a discreet tear, and William finally felt at peace. There, in that room brimming with memories and music, the Anderson family was whole again. Not in the way they had planned, not as they had imagined, but in a deep and genuine way only time and love could build. Sophie and Lily returned to the piano, beginning another piece, one of Michael's compositions written especially for his little stars. William and Grace sat side by side, listening as their granddaughters kept their father's music alive. The Michael Anderson Foundation for Music Education would grow to become one of the largest music teaching institutions in the country, offering scholarships to thousands of talented children. Michael's dream of making music accessible to all would come true in a way he could never have imagined. But to William, the real miracle lay there in that room, in the sound of the piano played by his granddaughters, in Grace's gentle smile, in the photographs that told a story of loss and redemption. The true symphony of forgiveness wasn't in grand concert halls or scholarship programs. It was in small moments like this, where love and music intertwined to heal old wounds and create new melodies. And somewhere, William was certain, Michael was smiling, proud of the symphony his family had become.